nation is all about the speech, everyone's opinions, the talking heads, but what does it really matter for you? We're going to try and break down the top takeaways of the budget in an easy to understand way and in our own andaz. Let's begin with the first big announcement, which was on the new tax regime. Was this really new, or is it new tax in an old bottle? Essentially, the finance minister has sweetened the new tax regime, which was introduced first in 2020. This was a tax regime which didn't initially take off. To be honest, it's not really been a big hit. But now the idea is to sweeten it further. So the tax rates in these slabs have been reduced. You will pay no tax if you make up to 7 lakh rupees a year. This is in the new and old tax regime. And the idea is to slowly phase out exemptions. Let's listen in to what the finance minister said.
I propose to change the tax structure in this regime by reducing the number of slabs to 5 and increasing the tax exemption limit to 3 lakhs. The new tax rates are 0 to 3 lakh, nil. 3 to 6 lakhs, 5%. 6 to 9 lakhs, 10%. 9 to 12 lakh, 15%. 12 to 15 lakhs, 20%. And above 15 lakhs, 30%. I propose to reduce the highest surcharge. Rate from 37% to 25% in the new tax regime. We are also making the new income tax regime as the default tax regime. However, citizens will continue to have the option to avail the benefit of the old tax regime.
All right, you had the new tax regime. Is it new tax in an old bottle? We're going to be speaking with experts ahead on the show to figure that out. The other big decision you would have heard of, and which is truly the big one, is the Capex push. Capital expenditure will go up to 10 lakh crore rupees, and this is going to be a 33% increase. The additional expenditure this year is supposed to be about 2.5 lakh crore rupees. In all, this is important, especially coming in a year when you want to be fiscally prudent. Listen in to what the finance minister said.
Investments in infrastructure and productive capacity have a large multiplier impact on growth and employment. After the subdued period of the pandemic, private investments are growing again. The budget takes the lead once again to ramp up the virtuous cycle of investment and job creation. Honorable Speaker, sir, the capital investment outlay is being increased steeply for the third year in a row by 33% to 10 lakh crores, which would be which would be 3.3% of GDP. This will almost be 3 times the outlay made in 2019-20.
You know, the balancing act for every finance minister is, do you spend or do you save? And this year was really tough for any finance minister. You're coming off huge spends in COVID-19. The fiscal deficit target for this year was 6.4%. We have hit that. And as widely expected, next year's target is 5.9%. So no real splurge on the fisc. This is good news for bond markets and really what economists were hoping to hear.
The revised estimate of the fiscal deficit is 6.4% of GDP, adhering to the budget estimate. The fiscal deficit is estimated to be 5.9% of the GDP. In my budget speech for 21-22, I had announced that we plan to continue the path of fiscal consolidation, reaching a fiscal deficit of below 4.5% by 2025-26 with a fairly steady decline over the period. We have adhered to this path.
Well, it's in vogue to go green. That's why we're saying green is the new black. And that's very clear from this budget as well. Right from custom duty relief on inputs that you need to import for green energy. All of those were given. The National Hydrocarbon Mission has been given a big boost. So the Finance Minister has made it clear that green is very much in vogue.
Green growth. We are implementing many programs for green fuel, green energy, green farming, green mobility, green buildings, and green equipment, and policies for efficient use of energy across various economic sectors. These green growth efforts help in reducing carbon intensity of the economy and provides for large-scale green job opportunities.
Well, if I had to add one more highlight, I would definitely add the announcement that there will be a special savings scheme just for women, just for 2 years, with an income of 7.5%. That's definitely a better savings scheme for the better half. So these were some of the key highlights from Budget 2023. Let's break it down further. Vipul Javeri, partner Deloitte India, is with me on the show. Sumant Sinha, Chairman and CEO Renew Power, with me. Just a quick programming reminder, I'm going to be sitting down with Union Minister Rajeev Chandrasekhar in just a short while and asking him about the budget as well. So we have a cracker of a lineup. But let me begin, Mr. Javeri, with your take on the budget. And really, the big story coming out is likely to be the headline of newspapers tomorrow, is the new tax regime. We've asked, is it a new tax in an old bottle? Little tongue-in-cheek take there. How would you see it? Yes, Mr. Javeri, can you hear me? All right, I don't think we have the line with Vipul Javeri. We'll try and sort that out. Sumant Sinha, can you hear me? All right. Hi, Sumant. We talked about what a big green push it would be. It's also dovetailing into the LIFE mission that Prime Minister Modi has announced late last year. Do you think enough has been done to really turn India towards the path of being a green economy?
Well, I think the answer to that question is yes. A lot has been done by this government towards turning India in a green direction, in a solidly green direction, I would add. And it's not just what this budget has, of course, announced. There have been a number of steps that the government has taken even over and above the budget itself. And the national hydrogen policy, of course, is something that was announced most recently, that the FM also reiterated in the budget. But I think beyond that, the Prime Minister setting these massive targets for renewable energy by 2030, now the hydrogen target of 5 million tons by 2030, the carbon intensity of GDP coming down. So all of those targets are already there. I think what the FM has now talked about is really turning our gaze and turning the government's attention, not just to these very sort of much discussed topics, but also adding to that a much broader and holistic way of looking at green. And as she said, and as the clip that you quoted, green vehicles, green buildings, more efficiency, green farming. So a lot of those areas that up till now had not really been touched that aggressively. Now the government is clearly saying, you know what, we're going to look at all of those areas as well, because it really dovetails very nicely with the Prime Minister's vision of life, which you talked about, which is lifestyle for the environment. And this is actually an interesting area, because the government of India is now taking the lead globally in pushing forward this concept of life, which is really a much more holistic way of looking at the whole issue of carbon emissions. Not just saying we want more renewable energy, but also saying, let's look at the kind of consumption we have. Let's look at how we can actually do carbon capture and so on as well in natural ways, and how we can prevent the emission of carbon in a number of different areas. So I think that's how the government seems to be now thinking about green much more holistically. But I think, beyond that, Tamanna, I think the points that you talked about earlier, which is the government has been able to maintain this very tricky balance between capex spending on the one hand and fiscal consolidation on the other hand. So growth versus the fisc, I think they've managed that particular balancing act very well in this budget.
Just a small rider there, and we as journalists tend to be a little cynical. At the end of the day, in the budget, you only have to announce what you plan to do. How much you'll eventually spend, where the fiscal deficit will grow, remains to be seen. How much you'll actually spend of your capital expenditure remains to be seen. But the intent is definitely there. What is there for sure is what they've done on the new tax regime. Vipul, I hope you can hear me. Mr. Javeri, can you hear me now?
Yeah, Tamanna, I can hear you.
All right.
Thank you.
So the big headline, the big news, and frankly what everyone wants to know is this a new tax in an old bottle? A lot of people didn't take to the new tax regime. Anecdotally, we have no official figures, but anecdotally, a lot of people didn't take to the new tax regime because the exemptions works out. Especially in this case, if you have an income above 15 lakhs, you're still going to be taxed at 30%, whether it's old or new tax regime. Does it now make sense giving up the exemptions?
Yeah, Tamanna, you see, actually, we have to look at it from salaried people as also non-salaried people. Now, for salaried, in addition to the change in the slabs that have been announced, there is also a standard deduction that is available to them. And then, in addition to that, they can also claim certain deductions or exemptions for HRA, leave travel, and so on. So, which is not available to the non-salaried people. And therefore, we'll have to look at each of them as a separate class of individuals. Now, certainly there is no one kind of answer, but one thing is certain that, because of the change in the slab, that the tipping point to say whether I am, going to be benefited more by the old regime or by the new regime has shifted more towards the new regime, in favor of the new regime, that is. And therefore, while each one will have to recalculate based on the deductions, exemptions that are available to them, and the salary that they get, or the income that they earn, and then see whether new regime makes sense. But my sense is that the tipping point now has shifted towards the new regime, which is exactly what the government is seeking, in terms of their drive towards simplifying the tax law, reducing litigation, and so on. So really, I think it's a step in the right direction. And you are right that last year, this new regime was not very successful. And therefore, this had to be done, which they have done. And hopefully, there will be more takers for the new regime.
Perhaps making it the default option will be that sort of big move. Because people will have to make an effort, and if they aren't really clear about what works better, if they don't go to a personal finance advisor or take advice from a CA, it just might be easier, especially for new workforce coming in. So that could be a change. Just a quick word from you, Mr. Javeri, on what relief has been given for the quote-unquote super rich. The finance minister said this in her speech as well, that the highest tax an individual pays in this country has now reduced from about 42.5% to 39%. This is usually not what governments do in a pre-election budget. Do you think there's going to be a massive impact of this, because this is for those who make 5 crores and above?
Well, it will be a material kind of amount, of course, depending on the overall income, but 5 crores and you save 3%, that's roughly about 30 lakh rupees. So that can be an income for a family. So really, I think it is a substantial benefit. But in terms of the total, tax foregone, perhaps, it is not such a big dent. But having said that, there is also a counterbalance that, they have put in by subjecting these super rich to capital gain tax by limiting the exemption on investment in real estate, house property. And also there are life insurance, term life insurance is another example where. So in a way, I think there is a trade-off, and all in all, it would be possibly more money in the hands of the super rich, but it's a matter of time. You don't buy a house every year, so that can be a timing difference.
More money in the hands of the super rich, more money in the hands definitely if you earn less than 7 lakh rupees. Did the middle class get that royal treatment that they were hoping for? It depends. You have to talk to your CA, look at your individual situation, whether you're a salaried employee, what your expenses are, and then make your decision. I want to come back to the big picture over here, Suman Sinha, because this was supposed to be a budget, and this is supposed to be a budget which sort of steadies the ship for India in what is going to be a tough year globally. Export-oriented businesses are, going to be hit. Did you see enough support coming in for industry?
Tamanna, I think I certainly did. I think there were 3 fairly major issues that this budget dealt with. Number one, of course, is the fiscal deficit, which we all know has a lot of consequential impacts on the economy in the form of higher borrowings, higher interest rates, and so on. I think the fact that the FM reduced it by 0.5% down to 5.9% and gave the glide path down to 4.5%, reiterated that, I think is very important, because what it does is it leaves more liquidity for the corporate sector to borrow from, and it leaves interest rates at a slightly better place, so that eventually, as we borrow to fund growth and fund Capex, or as individuals borrow for buying houses and cars and so on, it becomes cheaper to do that. And so therefore, that really creates a little bit of extra buoyancy in the economy. So I would say that's the first thing. The second thing is, by talking about spending so much extra money on the Capex cycle, look, that will lead to demand for materials like steel and cement, and so on, all the other raw materials as well. There was also the additional impact of increasing the housing spend by almost 66%. So all of those issues will lead to really a much stronger Capex push into the economy. Of course, as you rightly said, that money does have to be spent. Intent is one thing. Doing it is a second thing altogether. But I'm pretty confident that this government, given all the momentum that it's built in a number of different areas, whether it's railways or roads or airports and so on, I think they'll find the ability of spending that money. And that, as it gets into the economy, will eventually lead to its own consequential impacts on reducing the friction, improving the logistics and the connectivity, and thereby making India a more efficient and effective place to export from. Thirdly, I would say the fact that they've cut taxes and, by the finance minister's numbers, essentially injected another 37,000 crores of tax reductions into the economy, which I'm sure will find its way into the economy, I think is ultimately going to lead to a demand creation as well. So between all of these factors, what it does really is it creates a more enabling environment, a better environment within which corporates can actually make investments. It's going to lead to demand creation and faster economic growth. And ultimately, that's really what all of us want. I think along with that, the fact that the focus on the ease of doing business continues through better digitization. If you look at the MSME sector, there's a lot for the MSME sector in terms of additional credit guarantees and so on, the national registry. So I think it's going to really democratize growth across the entire economy for both large corporates as well as small corporates. So I think from that standpoint, it's actually very positive and should really create the groundswell for growth of 6 to 8% in a much more longer term sustained time period. And keep in mind one more thing, that there's a lot of global uncertainty. And this is a populist. I mean, this is an election year. And so keeping all of those things in mind, I think it's a budget that really focuses on domestic demand creation, eschews populism, focuses on the long term. So I think from that standpoint, it's very positive.
You know, that's interesting. It's perhaps not a populist budget, but you could call it a popular one. Everyone likes to hear that they may pay less taxes. You have to see if that actually happens or not. Thank you so much, Vipul Javeri and Suman Sinha, for joining us in the first leg of this conversation.